So, hello everybody. I just wanted to get on here to talk about going to the archives. This is a bit different from how I normally do my family history videos because most of the time I'm talking about how to do research that is internet based because most of the time that's all people have access to. And I love the fact that we have so much access to records online. And I hope that governments, libraries, and archives and online databases continue to make more records accessible to us in that way. But at this time, the reality is that most records aren't online. They're all just sitting on a shelf somewhere at the archives, waiting for you to go look through them. So, I recently got a chance to access some of the records at the National Library of Wales, and the things that I found there were really amazing. And the sense that I got based on what I found is that the kind of records that are waiting for us in the archives are the ones that have really detailed local accounts of our ancestors' lives. And I do wonder if those are ones that aren't getting priority in the limited funding that digitization projects get, just because of how they aren't record sets that have something for everyone, like a census or a parish register would. But in any case, getting a chance to go to the archives is an experience that I hope everyone who researches their family history gets to have. So in this live stream, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I did to prepare for the archives. And as I said before, if you have been to the archives, definitely let me know in the chat. Let us know in the chat how your experience was, what you did to plan, because I'm always interested to hear what other people are doing. So I do want to start with some context. My archives trip was pretty particular. I have some disabilities that makes it more difficult for me to actually go myself. So it was actually my mom who went to the archives for me. But I think that it's in a really encouraging part of the story, so I wanted to talk a bit about it. So how we did this was my mom went to the National Library in person, and then we used WhatsApp, which if you don't know, it's like a video call voice note app on your phone. So we used WhatsApp to have me there on a video call with her. She had headphones, so me talking wouldn't disturb anyone. And our goal was to get either photographs of the actual documents or have me read through the documents out loud and record my voice to create a transcript of it. And what ended up happening is that my mom was able to get photographs of almost everything that we wanted to look at. And that was in part because they were so old that they were out of copyright, meaning that we were allowed to make copies. Hi, Gareth. How are you doing today? Gareth says, the National Library of Wales is a great place for family history research. However, I found Powys archives to be very limited. Yeah, there's a lot of different archives in Wales, and no matter what country you're looking at, there's going to be a lot of different types of archives. National archives are going to have things that are different from the regional ones. But the regional ones, which I don't have a lot of experience with, honestly, they're going to have things that if your family comes from that particular area, they're going to have things that are they're going to be more related to life in that area. So they do have a lot of value. It's just about where the records end up, which is a whole history in and of itself, which is really interesting. So this plan of how we were going to access the archives with WhatsApp, with me on video call, this was actually based off of a program that the National Library of Scotland has. They have the virtual reading room where you can book a time with them so that you can have someone help you go through their undigitized records virtually. And I think this is an absolutely amazing program that makes accessing the archives a possibility for people who are disabled, who wouldn't have the opportunity to do that otherwise. And it's also good for non-disabled people because it expands access generally. And I think it's a program that libraries and archives should offer more. And it's one that governments should provide funding for. Because that's one of the difficulties with libraries and archives is they can only do so much with the funding that they're getting. And as we've seen in the past number of years, the Welsh government is defunding the library and archive system, which is not great. But beyond that plan, I did do a lot of other preparation work, and something that I decided at the beginning of my preparations is that I just wanted to go to the archives to collect as many records as possible. That was my number one goal. And other people are going to have other types of goals. Some people want to go and hold a record in their hand that their ancestor also held. Some people want to go and find their ancestors' handwriting, more like sentimental goals. Mine was just kind of like, I need more data so that I can find my ancestors. I just want to know more about their lives. So the goal was to get as much as possible. So yeah, I wanted that new data to help me build a deeper understanding of my ancestors' lives and maybe even break a brick wall. But again, that wasn't even at the forefront of my mind. And to help me achieve that, I came up with the phrase, no thinking, oh, I am on the wrong slide, no thinking in the archives. And I said no thinking in the archives so many times while preparing. And it was the guiding principle of my preparations. I wanted to do all of the thinking, all of the decision making before we went, so that when we got there, we would have as much time as possible to go through the records. So what I mean by no thinking in the archives is I don't want to be like deciding things. I don't want to be trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with certain records. All of that is better to be done beforehand. And in pursuit of that goal, my first step was I created a massive list of records that I wanted to look at. And this was something that I started a long time ago. So whenever I'd encounter a record that's in the archives but isn't online, I'd save it to my folders. And in the lead up to our archive visit, I just went through all of those records I had saved and picked out the ones that I thought would be the most helpful to my research. And I also laid them out nicely and organized them in a Word document. I also did more searches using the National Library of Wales catalog, just in case I missed anything, and I did miss some things, so I'm glad that I did go back and do that. And so for each record that I found, I gave it a name, or I pulled the name from the catalog. I saved the manuscript number, and I also saved the link so that I could have easy access to the summary online for it. And this was useful in a couple of ways. And it ended up looking like this in my little table of contents. I just had all these records laid out. The reason that saving all of this information in a Word document, having it all nice and organized, the reason it was helpful is it allowed us to keep organized while we were there. So I made sure to print off a copy of this list for my mom to take with her, and I had mine in front of me too while I was on the video call. And actually, I would suggest taking 2 copies, one for you to take with you, and also one for the archivist, especially if you have your records listed in a specific order, and we did have them in a specific order. And yeah, just so that like everyone is kind of on the same page. The list was also a guide for what we were looking at and what we should expect in each record. So there was never a time where we had a record in front of us where we were like, oh, I ordered so many records. What is this one? Like, we always were clear on what we were looking at, which makes the experience a lot better. It also allowed us to like check off all of the records that we'd already looked at and keep track of what we still had to go through. And it also made it easy for me afterwards when I went through and organized all of the photographs and the audio recordings that we had. Um, and just like deal with those and make sure that things were properly labeled. And in the end of making this list, though, I had just way too many records. So I created a ranking system just to like break the whole thing down. And I ranked each record as low, medium, or high priority. And in the end, I ended up with 15 high priority records. And those were the ones that we ordered for our visit. And 15 ended up being a whole lot, and we didn't end up getting through them all, but we got through almost everything, which was really great. One of the things that I had to consider too was how do I actually decide on whether something was low, medium, or high priority? Especially when I wanted to look at everything. And the first thing that I had in the back of my mind is that this may be my one and only chance to look at the records at the National Library of Wales. I just kind of sat with that and thought, so what do I want going there if this is my only time? And what I wanted were easy wins. I wanted things that that were guaranteed to give me interesting details about my ancestors' lives, so I chose records that would give me those easy wins. And I want to talk about some examples, but I'm not actually allowed to show you any of the records we got, so any images from here forward are just kind of random historical records that I found pictures of online. I think it's mostly pictures of letters. Yeah, so this letter is one from the Digital Commonwealth, which is a really great online resource for historical images. But I did get letters when we did our archive trip, and I got 5 letters from 1797 that were written by my 6 times great-grandfather and his brother-in-law. With this group of letters, my thought was that if I get these, I'm guaranteed knowledge about their lives. And these letters, they were actually about a conflict around the grazing of their sheep. Very Welsh. And they are packed with really fascinating local details that I'm really glad that we got to see these letters. My favorite line from the letters is when the brother-in-law accused my 6 times great-grandfather of killing his sheep up on the mountain, taking up dogs to harass them, and cutting some of the sheep's tongues out. Pretty gruesome. And he wrote of my 6 times great-grandfather saying that the merciless butcher escapes punishment, which is such an evocative line. It's the letters are just beautifully written, and beautifully written in the hand of someone who is fluent in Welsh and at some point got the chance to learn English and learn how to write in English, but they didn't have like a high fluency in English. So a lot of the letters are written as they sound, which is really interesting. But I chose these records because they were created by my ancestors, and they were created by them about their own lives. And that's the kind of archive, or that's the kind of records that you really want to look for um, when you're going to the archives. Um, Plus, the thing about letters is that they're really short and they're easy to look through, so they don't take up too much of your time while you're there. And what we ended up doing actually was getting the letters scanned, so we didn't really have to think about them at all. And that, of course, cost some money, but it was worth it. It was really worth it. The other record set that we looked at was the Davis Miscellanea. And so this was a really, really large collection of records, which amounted to at least 30 different things. And this included letters, pedigree, an old land deed, scraps of paper with poetry written on it, all kinds of different things. And every single record in that bunch was specifically related to my 8 times great grandparents or their descendants. And so, again, it was an easy win. And I have my favorites from this record set as well. I got my first original copy of my 8 times great grandfather's signature from 1767. There was also his wax seal, which was pretty distorted, but it looks like a horse's head. And my reproduction is there on the screen for you. That was on an indenture, which is like the agreement between him and a landlord for him to rent a farm. And so these land records, deeds, conveyances, rentals, all these kind of things are really amazing resources for family history, and will have things like your ancestors' signatures and their seal on it. We actually ended up getting the mark and the seal of my 5 times great grandfather as well on another indenture, which is really cool. There's also this record, a letter from 1809 from my 8 times great grandparents' grandson, where he's describing his time as a surgeon in the military. And he wrote this letter when he was in the Netherlands. And it's really fascinating. And so he writes in this like or pseudo-anthropological manner about how the people are and what their culture is like in that part of the Netherlands. So he wrote, "The inhabitants are a very quiet kind of people, dress very much like Quakers, both male and female. They never cut the manes nor the tails of their horses. They have very large brims to their hats and cocked behind like the clergymen in England. They all wear large buckles on their shoes and knees. They are very willing in general to do anything for one, if he can make them understand him. They all smoke except females, both great and small." So I love stuff like that. And it's so interesting that he's off in this place where there's different culture, different kind of people, different ways of life, and he's describing what they're like in reference to things that he's familiar with back in Britain. So these examples, though, they really exemplify my goal of getting easy wins. I knew 100% that they would have information about my ancestors because they were either created by my ancestors, or they signed the record themselves, or the record was about them specifically. They also exemplified my idea of no thinking in the archives because we didn't have to shuffle through papers or large registers or anything to find the people we were looking for. It's just, you have the record in front of you, it's about your ancestors. And so the National Library of Wales catalog, which I mentioned before, and most archives will have these kind of online catalogs that you can search through. They make it really easy to decide on what records that you should look through. Each entry in their catalog for the National Library of Wales has a little summary of the contents. So this is the one for the Davis Miscellanea. So it lists all of the things that are in that record collection. It also gives very short hints as to what each record contains. I won't read the whole thing out to you because it's quite long, but one example is it mentioned that there is an ordination certificate from August 19th, 1802 of Timothy Davis signed by his father, David Davis, and others. So like things like that are really helpful in helping you decide on what to actually look at in the archives. The thing is that not all of the catalog entries are this detailed. And so this is the entry for a list of burgesses from the parish of Betus Bledrws. It barely tells you anything other than that title. But another thing that I did before going to the archives was I actually wrote out what I was hoping to find in these records. So I was making educated guesses about the contents based on the research that I've already done about my family and about this parish. And so what I wrote for the list of burgesses was, this is a list of burgesses, officials, and voters in Betus Bledrws. Find references to relevant families, Davis of Tyneloft. If there are no farm names mentioned, it becomes low priority. And it becomes low priority because it would have just been a whole list of David Davis, Evan Thomas, Thomas Thomas. And it's really hard to deal with such little information. But if there were signatures, I wrote, it becomes high priority. So I guessed at what the record could look like, and I had a clear goal for why I was looking at the record, because I was specifically looking for this Davis of Tyneloft. And what the record ended up being was just a list of 26 names. Some of them did have farm names, but the majority didn't. The record didn't even have a date, so I've been trying to narrow down a date for when it was made. But my goal of finding a Davis of Tyneloft, we succeeded in it because David Davis of Tyneloft, who is my a different 8 times great-grandfather, and he was the person that I was looking to find. He was number 2 on that list. So there's my easy win. So another thing that I made sure of when I requested these records is I made sure that they were mostly primary documents. So like these are all records that my ancestors or people who knew them held in their hands and created themselves near enough to the event that they were writing about. So this includes things like letters, household books, diaries, and things of that nature. So these primary records are opposed to secondary records or secondary sources, which are other researchers' interpretations of primary and other secondary sources. So secondary sources, they have their use, especially as a guide for what primary resources are actually out there for you to look at. So sometimes I'll go through old books and be like, oh, I wonder where they got that piece of information. And I kind of figure out where those primary records are. But some sources also have elements of both primary and secondary sources. So something like a parish history might have parts that record local stories, poems, or other first-hand accounts. But then other parts of that parish history might have parts that are reviews of other articles written about that parish, and they might include things like the author's interpretations. But yeah, with this trip, I wanted to just go straight to the source. I didn't want to go to the archives and spend spend our time looking through a book of someone else's research about my ancestors. I wanted to know what my ancestors had to say about themselves. And I was really successful in that, and I did get a lot of primary documents. There is a point where I did slip up a bit because of my main goal, which was to get access to as many records as possible. Like I said before, there's other goals that you could have. Your goal could be more sentimental, like I want to hold a record that my ancestor held and kind of have that special moment with it. Or your goal could be something related to your brick walls, like I want to find records that are related to so-and-so's parents. And so that second one was kind of one of my unstated goals. And I really didn't consider it enough going into the archives visit. Um, and because I wanted to find more information about my 8 times great-grandfather, Timothy Jacob, the one whose signature I found. And I had hoped that between the Davis Miscellanea that I talked about, we also looked at the chapel register for the chapel he attended, and then also an 1885 pedigree of the Davis family. Between those 3, I thought I might make some progress toward breaking that brick wall. Well, turns out I was wrong. Oh, I forgot to show you. Oh, Timothy Jacob, there he is. That is a milestone that him and Samuel Davis laid in 1768. But yeah, this is where I kind of slipped up because of the fact that this part of my family has been researched before. And part of that is because one of Timothy Jacob's sons was David Davis of Castell. And he was a very famous, he was like the most important educator in Wales during his time in the early 1800s. So he's already gotten quite a bit of attention. And also because one of my ancestors, also from the same family, he was Rhys Jenkins Jones, and he was a Unitarian minister, a schoolmaster, and a historian, and he was really interested in the family history. And the reason that I've had so much luck in researching this part of my family is because he preserved a lot of the records. And he not only preserved them, but he transcribed them, he published them, he wrote about them in the newspapers and in the Welsh journals. And so that's why so many of these records have survived. And for him, Timothy Jacob was also a brick wall, and he spent a long time trying to figure out who his parents were. And what I realized after going through the records in the archives was that he also had access to these same records: the Davis Miscellanea, the Kilgwin Chapel Register, and the pedigree of the Davis family. And I know that he had access to them because a lot of the letters in the Davis Miscellanea were actually written by him about all of these records, talking about how he looked through them, how he had specific questions. And some of those questions are the same questions that I have over like 120, I think 121 years later. And yet, after looking through all of these records that I have also now looked through, he never figured out this brick wall. And what I realized was that if we have the same questions and we have the same data, then there's a good chance that if he didn't figure it out, that I might not be able to figure it out. And so this is the same kind of problem that you encounter when you look at secondary sources, because you're kind of limited by how much the person who wrote it knew, and you're limited by what they chose to include in what they wrote, and also what they chose to exclude. So even though I am happy that I got copies of all these records, I have to acknowledge that they probably won't help me figure out my brick wall question. And that means that if there is a next time at the archives, I may just have to be a bit more creative and think more creatively and search for the answer to that brick wall question in other record sets that Rhys Jenkins Jones probably didn't look through. And I already have ideas for this, which is really frustrating because there is no archive visit on the horizon. So yeah, I made sure to mainly request records like the ones that I've already talked about. Records that didn't require that we search through them to find a specific part that talked about my ancestors, which would amount to thinking in the archives, because that wasn't the plan. But records like that are also useful. So these would be things like registers, long book-like records, even like, what are they called? Like vestry records or like local meeting books. Those are a lot more difficult to look through in a limited amount of time. And especially if you want to look through other things as well during your archives visit. But I did purposefully request some records that we would need to search through, but we made sure to get through everything else first. And two of these record sets were the Burgesses list that I already talked about earlier. Oh, I didn't write what the other one was. The other one was there were a couple of them. There was the diaries of my 7 times great-grandmother's nephew. We looked through a bit, and we also looked through the chapel register, but also, like, I'm interested in that chapel as a whole. Like, I want to know about all the people who went there because I've got a kind of like a one-place study for that community. Because I think that they are the key to figuring out some of my brick walls. So I do a lot of research on them. So like, even though it was a register, I'm interested in everyone in that register. But with those Burgesses lists, to get back to those, they were very small parishes that we were looking at. Like I said, there was only 26 names on one of them, and I didn't expect them to be very long, so they still kind of passed the no thinking in the archives test. But the one that didn't pass the no thinking in the archives test was the diaries of my 7 times great-grandmother's nephew. This one ended up being really difficult to handle, and we actually wasted a lot of time just trying to figure out how to approach it. So the original plan for looking at these diaries was to flip through and find specific date ranges to see if he mentioned the deaths of any of his close relatives, mainly his Aunt Mary or his cousin Anne. I didn't know if the diaries were in Welsh or if they were in English, so I prepared a list of Welsh words and phrases to look for just in case, and that's mostly for my mom's use. And what ended up happening was we both got really frustrated trying to flip through the books because of how he wrote the diaries. How he wrote the diaries really didn't make it easy to do those kind of searches. Like, dates weren't really clearly written, and it wasn't always in chronological order, so we were just kind of flipping all over the place going, like, where are we? What date is this? So what I ended up doing after the two of us getting really frustrated, I was like, okay, I'm just going to read from the start of the diary. And so I read the diary out loud and recorded my voice, started from the very beginning, recorded that narration, and we only ended up getting 4 pages in before the end of the day, so it was a bit of a disappointment. So if you are interested in looking at things like diaries and like larger, more unwieldy record sets, you may either want to spend a whole day with them, or if they aren't very old and if they're out of copyright, you could probably just get photographs of the entire book, which I kind of wish, though, that we had done that. But it is really sad, though, about those diaries because the first 4 pages were absolutely fascinating. He was writing about, he was in this situation. This was in like the 1820s or 1810s. He was in this situation where he was at a social gathering and he was speaking, and he said something that the person he was talking to took off to spread as gossip and kind of use against him. And so he has all of these amazing entries about basically like, I'm making this resolution this year to learn how to watch my mouth in front of company. And he wrote a bit about it. And then a couple entries down, he gets to his birthday a year later and he's like, it's my birthday. I'm 25 now. And didn't I didn't succeed in my resolution to watch my mouth in front of company. And it's just such a human moment with these people who lived so long ago. And that's really the magic of going and finding these records in the archives, is that it's one of those ways to turn your ancestors from names and dates into actual real people, which for me is always the goal. But yeah, even though our plan for going through these diaries didn't work out very well, I do still stand by elements of it. And the main element that I stand by is that it's important for you to have specific goals going into each record set. Like, know what you're actually looking for before you go in so that you can, like, kind of focus down and actually, like, find success in your searching. One other thing that we did prior to the archives is we also planned for the possibility of my mom having to read through these records herself in the case that either the Wi-Fi didn't work, or in the case that if she wasn't allowed to take photographs of the records. So the 2 or 3 weeks before our visit, we just sat down in the evening and she learned how to read old handwriting. And if you're going to the archives, no matter who you are, you need to know how to read old handwriting. And I mean, like, there is no repeating this enough. You just need to know how to do it. And one thing that I've been thinking about today is how younger generations are being set up to fail in their archives trips if they ever end up going to the archives, because a lot of people aren't learning cursive writing anymore, which is it's a shame, because it opens up a whole new world called the past. But yeah, if you are going to the archives, you need to learn how to read old handwriting. And what me and my mom practiced on before our trip were wills from the National Library of Wales catalogue. And we focused on wills from the same time and place as the records we were looking at in the archives, since there are distinct styles across time and place. So we wanted to make sure that what we practiced on would be applicable to what she'd see in the archives. And you can see that different style from the 3 examples here. Yeah. So keep that in mind when you are practicing your old handwriting learning. But we only did one a night, and it wasn't every night. But by the 8th will or so, she was able to read almost the entire thing by herself. So, like, it's not an enormous undertaking. She did, of course, have me to help teach her. how to read this old handwriting, and she's really good at learning things by doing them anyway. But like, it's not difficult. It's if you really sit down and kind of set yourself up to win by practicing, you can learn how to read old handwriting. And I think I might actually make a future, I don't know if a live stream or a video would be better, but just to go through how, like, some of the strategies that I used in teaching myself how to read old handwriting so that you can replicate it and learn yourself. But yeah, it is one of those necessary skills that you need if you want to look at original documents. And the best way to learn is by doing. So, to sum up what I've talked about today, go into your archives visit with a plan. For my plan, I collected a list of all of the records that I wanted to look at. I narrowed down to the records that I knew would give me some guaranteed finds. I knew they would give me guaranteed finds because I thoroughly researched them beforehand. Like, I researched these records so much that I had theories on who created some of these records. I was like, I think this is this thing that I heard about in this other source. So, like, just go deep into researching them. Oh no, my waveform is in front of the bottom point. There we go. We'll move that down. So research them beforehand. I made sure to get primary original records that were largely created by or specifically about my ancestors. And I made sure that everyone involved had the ability to read the old handwriting on the records. And beyond that, I just hoped that there would be some surprise finds along the way. And there were, and I came out of the experience with a lot more records that tell me about my ancestors' lives. And I'm still hoping that as I continue to go through all the records, that I'll be able to break a brick wall or something. But even if that doesn't happen, I'm happy. I'm very happy with what we accomplished. And if anyone at the National Library of Wales ever watches this, just know that it was a really great experience and everyone was really supportive and helpful. And that's including being open to the possibilities of helping someone with disabilities access the records, which made me feel very welcome. So yeah, as we wind down, does anyone have any questions, or maybe you've been to the archives and have some different ideas for a plan? Have you looked at the catalog for any of the physical archives yet, and have you found anything that you're wanting to go look at? Let me know. And if you're typing up some comments or anything, I'm just going to read out the thank yous. So thank you to our amazing YouTube members, Alan Griffith and Wiggle Wiggle, for their support. You can also help support the channel by becoming a YouTube member, or you can sign up for the newsletter as a paid subscriber. Both of those are $5 a month. They might be $5 American a month. So however much that is in your currency. Otherwise, it is always incredibly helpful when people leave a like or even a dislike. If you dislike that, dislike it. It'll let me know what to do for next time. And comments on the video help incredibly well. Because it shows YouTube that people are interested and engaged, and that means that they will push the video out to more people.